Okay, so today's topic is understanding the attributes, attribute types, and how we can actually classify or define a specific thing. Maybe in the future, maybe another time, we will need to just focus on understanding the importance of definitions because all of the things that until now, all of the things that we actually talk, all of them define something with a certain attribute, with a certain aspect. So when we tell the attribute for any kinds of entity, let me just, for instance, put a specific entity here, and let's say this entity is, I am giving a random name here, the Paris. So we already know that actually Paris here, it is already a city, but we have a couple of aspects for a city. For instance, every city also has a kinds of area, let's say area. It will also have different zones. Let me just write down too. The zones, and also there will be a mayor, there will be a population, let's say population, and also there will be history and some other things. And all of these things also will create some other types of connections or other types of attributes at the same time. So when you look at the situation like this, you will need to start to classify these attributes, or you will need to create a distinction between these things. Because when you start to write any kinds of document, or when you start to actually create any kinds of article, you are already processing these attributes one by one, and you process some of them first and you process some of them later. So in this case, if I would ask a question like, let's say there is a query, and the query just says the Paris, but there is nothing else. And in the previous lectures, we actually talk about uncertain inference, and we talk about query writing. And in terms of the query writing, we can actually write here Paris, let's say weather, or let's say Paris landmarks, let's say again the Paris museums and Paris transportation. Any kinds of attribute can actually come here. Once you do this, the next step is actually distributing some certain types of percentages. Let's say with 5%, the person might search it. With 10%, the person actually might search this. The next step is question generation, as I say. Let's say Paris weather. We can also tell that, let's say, how is the Paris, let's say, how is the weather in Paris? Or this question actually can be represented with a broader question, which is, how is the climate in Paris? So when you look at the situation like this, you will actually start to realize that from a single query that actually mentions just a named entity, we will need to use different types of uncertain inferences, and we will need to use different attributes. Once we use these attributes, we will need to distribute some possibilities in terms of the possible search demands or search activities. Then we will need to start to generate questions, and then we will need to represent these specific questions with some broader aspects. And once we do that, even if we do these things in this way, actually, here we just focus on mainly the possibility of the search of the specific attribute. But if I will tell you which attribute in this area or among these ones, which one is more important than the others, you can also add more attributes to the Paris, by the way. Which one do you think? You can give the wrong answers too. You can even give a methodology as well. How do you understand which attribute is more important? If we tell that, for instance, let's say we have written NordVPN here as an entity, how would you define the attributes of the NordVPN, and how would you decide which one is more important?
My guess would be that cities first, due to the fact that that's the main thing that Paris is, and then it will go to more and more relevant stuff. So areas, zones, may knowledge just about, for example, the layout of the city and how the city is working in a way. So unless we give anything specific, it will go from the biggest to the smallest in order of basically the main criteria, like Paris being a city.
Yes, so since the city, the word city here actually, it represents the entity type. And we already mentioned the concept of semantic dependency tree before, and we even have given an example in terms of Buckingham Palace, British monarchy, and United Kingdom, and the currency pound. It was actually a semantic dependency example. We can actually give another sample there too. If you search, for instance, let's say you search for a specific type of food. Let's say you search for, I don't know, maybe spaghetti or something. If I write it wrong, sorry. Let's say you search for spaghetti at 5th block or something like this, and let's say you are in the New York. In this case, the spaghetti is closer to the actually Italian food. So in this case, the search engine knows that they will need to find the specific restaurant like this. Let's say Italian restaurant at 5th block. And if the search engine, if they have the data of their menu, they can also check the word spaghetti in their menu, or they can check the word spaghetti among the reviews. Or they can check the historical data as well, because they actually call these type of local search related things. And by the way, 45% of the queries are classified under local search intent for the Google. And with that said, there is a concept that we call actually visit satisfaction. So in local search, it's not about click, it is actually about visiting somewhere, and they're able to actually understand whether you like the place or whether you don't like the place. They can check actually how long you stayed in the place by just tracking your phone, which is actually called food traffic. Sometimes they can even understand whether your comment is fake or not by just checking your location history. If you didn't go to the place anytime, and still if you write some reviews about it, it means that actually you didn't get a service from them. Lately, they also have these badges, trusted store badges, which is a new thing. Let me just show that too, because this is connected to the semantics again. Trusted store badge. Maybe I can find some information here. Let me search it quickly. Here. So they don't give that much information in this area because they are actually performing a kinds of agreement with FedEx and some other product shipment services, etc. The purpose here is actually understanding whether you ship the products or not. And already since they have some tracking systems to understand that, even if you have an e-commerce store, they can actually track your product on the way. Why is it important? Because they are trying to gather information about the real existing world, the physical world, outside world. Whenever they are able to actually learn something new about your menu, your food, your chairs, your entrance, your location or something, they will be able to integrate these things into their search system, even if they don't see these things in the queries. But if you look into this area, if you see a kinds of type-related attribute, for instance, you can tell Paris is a mayor. You can tell Paris is a population. Paris is a history. These sentences don't make sense. But when you tell Paris is a city, it makes sense. It means that actually you have found the type of the entity, which is the most important attribute. When you can also tell Paris is an area, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be a city to be able to be an area. Other types of localities, all of them actually have an area or certain types of zones. So in this case, the city is more important than area or the zones at the same time. If I come back to my glossary here, let me just read a little. There are different types of attributes to be used. Attribute types represent the entity type, but also context. In this case, an entity can have multiple attributes and attribute types for these attributes. These are mainly below. And root attributes, rare attributes, and unique attributes. So if you read the definitions, root attributes are common attributes for that entity type or all universe, like size, small, smell, color, or battery type for a phone, because every phone or mobile phone has a battery and battery type. So basically, once you are an existing thing and once you have a certain type of a certain classification for your own entity, it means that actually you will have some natural root attributes. Let's say you are a city, it means that you have a mayor. Or let's say you are a city, it means that you have a population. These are root attributes, attributes that actually appear in everywhere. We also have rare attributes. And in this case, rare attributes are rare because they are not common anymore. For example, Apple phones have iDrop, while Android phones have other methods for file transfer. But they both have a touch screen or an AI assistant with voice recognition. So in this case, having a battery or having a touch screen, for instance, these things might be root attributes for mobile phones of today. But when you look at the iDrop, it's not root attribute because it doesn't appear in all of the entities or all of the entities from that type. When it comes to the unique attributes, these are the most important attributes and the most relevant ones to define an entity because only that entity has that attribute. For instance, Hagia Sophia, which is from Istanbul, having a church, mosque, and museum. And in this case, imagine that there is a building and it was a mosque, it was a church, it was also a museum. So this is something unique. You can't find this type of a classification for every building in the history. So I will try to come here and I will search for the Paris in the Google. And if you check the knowledge panel, you will see some certain types of actual expansions. They're actually giving colleges and universities. They also give some other related entities that people also search. And in this case, they give the country that Paris is located in, they give two different capital cities. They give the Eiffel Tower, which is highly relevant to the Paris. And if you look at this area, you see the food, the background of the city, nickname of the city, and the seasons in the Paris. So if I search for Istanbul this time, you will see that actually these sections will change. If you go to the Istanbul, now we have the religion, not actually the food, not the background, not something else. And now we have the history. Again, we have the food, sorry for that. But religion and the history, they are actually different from each other. If you look at this area, again, we have colleges and universities, but this time we actually have only cities from Turkey. I will search something more here. Let's search for maybe Warsaw. And in this case, let's check the attributes here too. We don't have any kinds of expansion here. It might be because of my Chrome instance too, or it might be because the search engine couldn't organize the information under certain criteria for Warsaw. But again, if you look into this area, we actually see another capital city and also some other cities from the region and the country. And if I search another city, let's go to the one more. Let's go to the London and let's check it to the expansions. Again, we don't have any expansion, sorry for that. And but still, if you check how Google generates these descriptions based on their own language models, actually, you will realize that they start with the capital and they start with a relation to a specific type of other country. So in this case, when you actually write your own definitions, you will need to understand different heaviness or different weights for different attributes. For instance, they would also tell that actually London is a city with X population rather than actually saying the population. So in this case, if I need to give a couple of more examples, if we ask you a question like what is X or what does X do, what are the benefits of X, if you have something unique about that specific entity, give these things first, okay? If you need to give the type of the thing, look at the root attributes, because according to the root attributes, the rest of the attributes will start to change. If you talk about the rare attributes, these are usually for explaining the difference of something, explaining the advantages of something by comparing it to the other things. But most of the time, if an attribute is unique or less, let's say it is more rare or rarer, in this case, it is very much more important to put in the article. If you explain, for instance, when you look at the London, we also have another word here, which is the London Bridge. And this is actually called, in a way, this is called actually a kind of diagram. And on the web, there are millions or maybe even billions of articles that mention the London Bridge together with some other sections. And when you look at the word London Bridge, in this case, the search engine will actually take any kinds of table that appear in these type of pages. They will take all of the lists, they will take all of the words that appear at the left or appear at the right, and then they will start to actually distribute these things and analyze these things according to the distributional semantics. Once they finish these areas, they will start to extract the attributes, and then they will start to classify the attributes. If some of these attributes appear only for London Bridge, it means that they are unique and they are more important. If London Bridge is a certain type of bridge, you will have some rare attributes that will appear only for London Bridge or for other bridges from that type. If you have the root attributes, they are actually not that important, but still, to define that specific entity, you will need to use them again. So now I will talk about attribute parameters, because this section will actually help us further to complete these teachings, and you will also understand why the set theory is that important. Let me close the limit because it makes me drowsy. So if I look at the attribute prominence, the attribute relevance, the relevance of an attribute actually is a connection between the query and the entity. If you think that this specific attribute is really relevant to your topic, your context, it means that you will need to give more weight to that. And when it comes to the prominence, it's not relevant to the relevance, or it's not relevant to the query. Let's say, without using a certain type of word, you can't define something. As I say before, let's say I ask you a question like, what is Germany? Or define me the Germany. And let's say here, just for this example, you say Germany is a country. Once you say the country, every country actually has land, let's say, population, let's say, they also have a government. So it means that actually these attributes, land, population, and government, these three things are actually the most important or the prominent attributes. Because if you tell that a country doesn't have land, it means that it's not a country anymore. If there is no population, there is no country. If there is no government or king or something, if there is no any kinds of governor there or manager, it means that again it's not actually a country anymore. So if you subtract or exclude an attribute from that entity, if you think that it doesn't make sense anymore, it means that it is actually a prominent attribute. But if you remove from here, let's say the national TV, if you remove the national TV from a country, the country will continue to be a country. It means that it is not prominent anymore. If you look at the attribute popularity, again it comes from relevance. As relevance, it also comes from the queries. And when it comes to the attribute popularity, it means that, let's say, X attribute appears, let's say, 90 times within query network, let's say with 2,500 search demand. So basically the search demand and different variations of phrasification of that specific attribute in the query network represent its popularity. If you want to understand the popularity or search demand for a specific attribute, you can't just check the search demand, you will also need to check how many times these specific attributes appear with different phrasifications or phrase orders in different queries. And once you are able to actually unite all these things, and let's say query relevance to the entity attribute. And in this case, while writing your article, if you're able to use all of these parameters in a really good way, if you're able to choose relevant, prominent, and popular attributes to define your entity and to compare it to the others and to explain it further and to give suggestions to the users or information to the users or to convert the users, it means that actually you will be able to rank also higher too. So I will read this section a little further to help. Basically, attribute relevance represents the contextual domain of the specific text one, An attribute might be relevant to a different context, and another one might be for another one. For example, the English language is a universal language, but it might not be relevant to the Shakespeare's Hamlet analysis of social structure of the 16th century, even if English is relevant to the context. So in this case, we have an entity here which is called English language, and English language, it is also language of the Hamlet's, the screenplay Hamlet, and it comes from Shakespeare. All these three entities are connected to each other. And when you tell universal language, this is an attribute of the English, which is an important attribute actually. But if you want to explain the Hamlet or something like that, being a universal language, even if it is a correct attribute, is not relevant at all. Because you can't explain the Hamlet's analysis of the social structure of the 16th century, let's say, is not relevant to the being a universal language, even if this attribute is accurate and belong to the English language. Attribute provenance is relevant to the set theory. It comes from the nature of the thing and its pure definition. Use attribute provenance to state the context, and usually these attributes provide a better understanding of the specific entity's identity. For example, Istanbul is a crowded city, Istanbul is a historical city, Istanbul is a business center, Istanbul is an earthquake zone, and Istanbul is an educational university area. So if you think in this area, all of these definitions are correct actually, because Istanbul has all these features, all these attributes. But in this case, which one is more important, or which one is more accurate, or which one is actually more helpful? Because we have created different sets. We tell that on Earth, there are cities with crowded population, there are cities with historical background, there are cities with business center capacity, and there are cities with earthquake risks and history, and also there are cities with high intensity of the universities. All these things are different arrays, different lists, different sets. So Istanbul actually appears in all of them. And in this case, Istanbul is a city, area, zone, center, and also a business center too, and also it is a place for history lovers too. But which one is more important? It changes for the context, but one that appears more prominent for the definitions is the more prominent, again, which is the city. Because if you write to the Google, Istanbul is a center, most probably the next word will be actually of. Istanbul is a center, and let me just check here. Again, actually, of the word of what, for example. They ask that question directly, but whatever the answer is, it's not relevant to the it's not relevant to the root attributes of that specific entity that much. Even if the word appears there, it actually doesn't mean that in this case. And here, the bolded sections here, diplomacy, culture, commerce, is a center for these attributes, for instance, and they are bolding them in a direct way. And in this case, if you are able to define something with a specific attribute, give more weight to that, just for the definition. And when it comes to the attribute popularity, it comes from the existence of a specific entity for specific query groups. It explains how these things are used in search volume and the search phrases. If an attribute is popular, it can still be used to increase its relevance, but it doesn't mean that it is a perfect connection. So if I may open my research library from here, I will try to show you one from here, and it is actually, let me just find. This is actually, you might like this one too, because entity displaying priority in a distributed geographic information system. Here they try to actually explain which entity is more important than which one, according to the what context. And here actually they try to understand the relevance and also again the click satisfaction, but this one is actually mainly for the localities, I can tell. And you have actually already seen the working system here at the people also search for section. This is important, identifying the entity attributes. In this one, they try to actually identify which entity has what types of attributes. And in this case, again, here we have countries, population, then we have Scandinavian countries and the population. again the United States, and etc. So they are actually trying to actually reconcile these entities with as different sets, let's say. And in this example too, here we have different population types, urban population or tourist attractions or etc. And it continues, again, this is actually an example of the information graph. I will suggest you to read this one as well. And if you look at this area, unnamed entity recognition of the sense mentions, this is about concept recognition, especially for certain type of words. If you tell, for instance, the sound of clanking swords or the corridors, etc., smell of emulsion. So these type of things are hard for machines to recognize. That's why while writing my own articles or while giving some briefs, I usually use certain types of phrases or phrase combinations to help search engine to understand these things. And this is about actually understanding this type of unnamed entities. And this is one of the most important ones, attribute and query and the entity association based on the query search behaviors. And if you read this one too, you will be able to understand, for instance, when you search for the Washington, you will see certain types of entities, certain types of explanations like state, they say, which is another attribute for the Washington. And they also start by saying Washington is actually a state. And in this area, they give information for a different district and also Pacific Northwest. So they try to gather everything like the president, because Washington is a capital, let's say, state, but Washington DC is a city there. And also they try to gather all these things. Again, we have the universities, etc., or the George Washington, if we mean that. And if you look at some other samples, identifying entity, etc., but let me just check. There should be some samples in this area, but due to the time problems, I won't be able to stay longer, but let me read this one. For example, a unique identifier. The unique identifier is actually a unique attribute. For the entity associated with the wrestler Steve Borden, may be associated with a name or alias property of the Sting, another alias property of the Steve Borden, and occupation property of wrestler, and birth date property March 20, 1959 in the entity properties database. So when you look at this area, the Sting, as I can remember, it was a song name or a movement or something like that that can actually belong to only to the Steve Borden. But the thing is, there is another person with the same name in this research paper, and they are trying to use unique identifiers or unique attributes to differentiate these entities from each other in this case. And if you read these things, you will see actually how they explain these things even further, and they will try to also explain, the musician, the Sting musician, they will try to explain how they can actually differentiate entities from each other just based on the authoritative sources and checking how similar other sources are to the first chosen authoritative ones. According to that, actually they create different indexes, and sometimes they unite them back according to the possible relations. So there are many other researches here, just the ones that mention the word entity, they are all actually really good. The entity matrix, this is also a good one actually. And in this one too, to rank the results, they try to understand how they can actually weight different attributes with what kinds of formulas, let's say. And in this one too, this is actually not just a pattern, I can tell it is also a research too. And if you check this one too, I believe it will be useful again. So I will need to go to the other meeting. They already wait for me. I recorded everything. I will upload these things. The next lecture, we will be explaining the frames. I will put some notes here. It will be the last section. And if you have maybe some questions, you can convey me them later. But if you want to say something, I can spend maybe 90 more seconds.
You mentioned before in the first lecture, I believe, that we might have some practical lesson. Will we? on writing and just
To be
using
able to do that, I will need you to write at least a couple of paragraphs from the briefs that I have created, so that we can actually revise it together.
So we need to write some of it and
Yes, then we can actually revise it together. It will be
Okay.
easy. Okay?
good.
Okay, then. Another question? Waiting. Okay, then. So, I believe tomorrow, same hour, we will be seeing each other. I will upload this recording. I will also put these frames here too. And if you write a few paragraphs, maybe for a query or for something, we can try to put some practical suggestions and practical explanations for that too as well. And if you want, we can also go over from the algorithmic authorship one, because there are some practical samples there. It doesn't actually explain the theories, it just gives samples and it explains why one of them is wrong, why one of them is correct, and how to use it in a brief way. Okay, then, happy to see you and see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Thank you.
Tschüss.